Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Mind if I ask how old you are, Luke?
I'm 15.
I see, and there's nothing wrong with being 15. Have
Yeah.
you have you read much of Ambrose or John Chrysostom?
Yeah, I've read Chrysostom. I've read I don't know if you consider him apostolic, but Dionysius, Clement of Alexandria. I've even read Origen, even though my church condemns him. I've read Origen. I've read yeah, most of the Ignatius. I mean they all held what I interpret as a universally binding magisterium or a infallible church which guides the interpretation of things. Also, for veiling, there is face veiling was only really talked about for by Tertullian. At least I've never seen any promotion of face veiling besides Tertullian.
Well, I can show you. Like on this section, I'll send you this link here. Every single church father talks about face veiling. They didn't know about any other veil except for a face veil. That's the only one they knew about. If you had told them that there was some kind of veil that is covering anything except the face, they'd say, "What is that?" Because they'd never heard of such a thing. Did you see this little section here, just the short preview? Because these are some short quotes, and then the much
This is on your
longer.
website?
Yes,
Oh my god. And these are actual quotes?
these are real quotes with references every single time. Here's Shepherd of Hermas. I mean, he talks about a virgin meets me. He says she's veiled up to her forehead, and her head was covered by a hood. So he sees a veil as something being on the face. Irenaeus says this. He says, in the same epistle, when Paul says a woman ought to have a veil upon her head because of the angels, Moses rendered manifest when he put a veil upon his face. So he is
Wait,
quoting the veil on Moses'
and
face.
can we talk about the first one?
Sure.
And up to her forehead, wouldn't that imply not a face veil?
No, it would imply something like this. This is a very common Greek style of veiling. Did you know all of the Greeks and all Roman women veiled their face? We have a lot of evidence at the bottom of this page to show you that. When Paul
I did
told the
not know that.
Corinthian when he told the Corinthian women to veil themselves and to not unveil themselves at the time of prayer, he's referring to a Corinthian practice, a Greek practice where women would unveil themselves at the time of praying or prophesying. But they already had veils on once they arrived at church because veiling was the predominant practice in Greece and it was all over the world. At the bottom of this page, you'll see I have a section called Veiling Around the World. So we have Greece and Rome. You see this section here?
Mhm.
This is very lengthy. You see, we've got Homer, Plutarch. Like Plutarch, you may not realize, but he is one of the most famous of all the Greek historians. He talks about face veiling at length. He says this was the common practice everywhere in Greece. But
Wait, what does the Greek and Roman culture have to do with the church?
well, let's see. The only New Testament scripture we have where Paul is commanding people to veil is a letter sent to the Greek city of Corinth, right?
Yeah.
And he gives them four reasons for why they should veil. He says, first of all, that woman is not made for man, or man was not made for woman, but woman for man, and man didn't come from woman, but woman came from man. And he says also women are to
Yeah.
veil because
I
of the
said that.
angels. And then he
I'm not
says,
against veiling. Yeah, I'm all for veiling, and I would even say face veiling is good. I'm against the promotion of face veiling as necessary because I think that's false piety.
well, do you believe that Paul was commanding a face veil?
No,
So the
I think he
question
was commanding
is,
a head covering, but not necessarily a face veil.
so just so you know, they use only one word. I'm not sure what you think it says in the Greek. There's no difference between head covering and face veil in Greek. It's just katacalypto. Kata means coming
Well,
down,
why would
calypto
there
means
be?
veiled. There's no difference in their mind. A veil is something that covers the face. They don't have to specify face. But that's something in our vocabulary. We think face has to be specified. But I will show you, though, that the face is definitely being veiled. And you asked a question, and I'll let you speak in a second. But you asked, why does it matter what the Greeks were doing? It's because Paul is upholding a practice in Greece. He's talking to Greeks in the Greek language, and he's telling them that Jesus commands them to veil. And he says this. Look at this part where he says, "But for I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you. Hold firmly to the traditions just as I delivered them to you." And he goes on to talk about veiling. So he says this is a tradition that Jesus gave him. Jesus says women are to veil themselves. And are you aware in the Old Testament that women veiled the face?
Women veiled the face. Moses veiled the face in the Old Testament. I don't know about women.
Well, no, the women, the righteous women veiled their faces. I'll zoom in for you a little bit here. Are you able to see this? Right here?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
So here's Genesis. Do you remember Rebecca going to meet Isaac just before they're
Yeah.
married? It says, she said to the servant, "Who's that man walking toward us?" The servant said, "It's my master, Isaac." And so she took her veil and covered herself. And this is a thyristron veil. This is like the most complete kind of veil that you could come up with. Lots of church fathers define the thyristron, like Jerome defines it, Chrysostom defines it. They say this is a complete covering over the face and everything. I'll show you those in a second, but I'm just giving you examples of women veiling in the Old Testament. Here's Tamar. It says she covered herself with her veil. She covered her face, and he knew her not. So this is clearly a face veil. You know about like Solomon talking to his wife. Your eyes are doves behind your veil, he says.
Oh yeah.
There are lots of these. You know the story of Susanna. You know, as she was
I'm
veiled,
getting something.
Hmm.
it says the lawless men ordered her to be unveiled so that they might feast their eyes on her beauty. A lot of translations, including the Catholic Bible, they just say, you know, her face was veiled, and they know that this is a face veil. They're wanting to see her face here. They're not trying to look at her hair. This idea of a hair covering is something that developed way more recently. The early church had no idea of a hair covering. You'll not see in any of the quotes about veiling them ever even mentioning veiling the hair. That's this satanic deviation from the actual thing God wants to be veiled. But like, look at this
Do you
one.
think
This
veiling the hair is not what you should be doing, but only veiling the face or veiling both?
you don't have to veil the hair. The only reason you would need to cover the hair is if you had done up the hair to look really outrageous and pretty. Then you should cover it because it's alluring people. But the main reason to
Wait,
veil
wait. But
is
when it says to cover the head, do you think
right.
that's like by head you mean face?
It's the whole head, yes. But you know, Paul says that the hair is a veil. It's a natural veil. So you don't have to
Yeah.
cover the veil. That doesn't make any sense. Like, do you have to cover the covering? Do you have to veil the veil? That's not necessary. The
Hmm.
church fathers say that if you don't have a veil on hand, if a woman doesn't have a cloth veil, she should just use her hair. She should throw it in front of her face. That's what they say. And I can show you those. But just one last section here. Look at Numbers. God made a law that if a woman is accused, an Israelite woman is, if she's accused of committing adultery, she's brought before the priest. It says the priest shall cause the woman to stand before the Lord and shall uncover. So apocalypse, this is the same word for take off the veil. He shall unveil the head of the woman. So that tells you all the women in Israel were veiling. And the question is, Luke, what kind of veil is this? How might we know what kind of veil this is? Do you think there's a way to know?
Yeah, whatever the fathers interpret it as.
I agree. And also, since Paul points out that this is a natural custom, we can also look at what all the Greeks were doing. We can see it was a law in Greece and in Rome. A man could divorce his wife if she ever went out without her face veiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just see a few quotes. So you can ignore the Shepherd of Hermas one if you don't like this one. But I'd put it on here just so you know this is something on the
Mm.
forehead. This is not something on the back of the head or the top of the head. But Irenaeus says in the same epistle, when Paul says a woman ought to have a veil upon her head because the angels, Moses rendered manifest when he put a veil upon his face. So he is correlating these two things.
I have a question.
Sure.
Why, how, this is kind of off topic, but why do you take these as authoritative? Like I do as well, but like why do you take them as authoritative?
Well, the whole unanimous testimony of the church has weight because in the scriptures it tells us that we ought to be obeying the unanimous testimony of the church, of the
Do
bishops.
you agree we can only know the scriptures are true because of the church?
No, we're not Protestants. Remember, we don't have,
Yeah,
yeah, we don't have the Protestant mindset of saying this is our specific canon. We have a much larger canon than the Catholics and Orthodox. See, because we read the
but
church
you
fathers.
have a larger canon as well than us.
Of course, yeah. We
Like
whatever
the Oriental canon or what?
Yeah, whatever books the church fathers quote from, we consider those to be sacred and holy. So we don't have a
On the same
Protestant canon.
level as the Gospels and stuff?
Yeah, we would say the Orthodox are missing the books of the Bible. We'd say they're the ones missing it. We aren't missing any books of the Bible. We respect the authority of the church. But if you want to know the order of authority, it starts like this. The way we know that Jesus is the Christ is because the Old Testament prophecies prove it. He fulfilled those prophecies. And those prophecies couldn't have been fulfilled naturally. It had to have been miraculous. It had to have been divinely inspired because the prophecies were so specific and so unlikely to happen. So if we know Jesus is the Christ, then we trust him. We trust the men that he appointed as his successors to be in charge of his church. So we trust the apostles. And then by extension, we trust those other men that the apostles put in charge. And so when we
Yeah.
look at the writings of the church, we find that they had certain books that they held in high esteem, that they considered to be holy. So we agree with them.
And who made this? Like a church? Like, are you the guy who made it, or
No, I and
well,
you, Luke, are caught up in a movement right now of people who are investigating the early church. See, I want to join God's church, whatever it is. I want to be part of that church. But since there are multiple churches, there are at least two, the Orthodox and the Catholics, that claim to be the early church, then we have to have
an
some
Oriental?
right. And are you Oriental?
No, I'm Eastern.
Okay. But I'm just saying God has to have given us a method to know which of those two groups or any of the other groups within the Orthodox is the true
Yeah.
church. And we have to be able to do that apart from the priests. Because if you say, well, we have to ask the priests which of them is right,
No,
well, then
no.
we'd just
Yeah,
be,
I agree. We asked the fathers, the early
yes.
fathers, and their thing. But did you just like, were you just sitting and just said, I'm gonna make a church, or what?
Well, no, I mean, it's not a church. It's the church is the
The
church.
church.
I'm joining the church. I'm not the
But
church.
you think the church fell away and then you restored it?
Well, I've never said anything like that, but just answer, Luke, let's not be ridiculous here. Either either the church is right from the beginning or it's wrong from the beginning. If I'm choosing to align myself with the early church's teachings, I'm not some kind of rebel. I'm not
But
doing
wait,
something
how do
weird.
you know you're interpreting them correctly?
Well, if we take the
Like,
unanimous testimony of all the church fathers, they're all saying the same thing, then of course I trust my own judgment because the fathers are so much more explicit and so much more elaborate in their explanations than the scriptures. The scriptures are hard to
how
understand
do you
because
constitute what the fathers are? Yeah.
whatever, well, if we see that there's a unanimous testimony, those have to be all the fathers. All the most famous and revered men in church history, those are the church fathers. We trust that. We trust that record.
So if, for example, 80%, oh wait, are you Aryan?
Of course
Do
not.
you believe in like, okay. If because there was a time when the church was 80% Aryan or semi-Aryan. If say if the fathers of the Aryans, if we still had their writings, would you then be Aryan because the consensus of the fathers was Arianism?
No, because there are 3 points that make up orthodoxy. Have you ever read Vincent of Lerins?
A little bit, yeah.
Well, he says there are 3 points. He doesn't create these 3 points, but he actually just summarizes them because you can find the early church talking about this. We made a little section of it here if you want to read what all the church fathers say is the method for ascertaining the truth. But it's not just that the whole church teaches something, but it's also that it is the original teaching. So if the church once taught something for 300 years, like the divinity of Christ, and then they contradict it, it doesn't matter if the whole church teaches it because they're going against the original teaching. That's why we would say the Orthodox could be wrong. Just like you said, it's possible for the whole church to agree on something and to be wrong about it. But we don't trust that if
Yeah.
it contradicts the original teaching. Do you agree?
But I don't think the church will ever be 100% wrong. I don't think everyone in the church will be wrong. I still think there'll be like snippets of truth. Like right now, there's a lot. Like the Orthodox Church has been struggling with ecumenism. We have higher ups that have been getting into ecumenism, but that doesn't mean the church has fallen, and that doesn't mean we separate ourselves from the church. That just means that we persevere and preserve through the heresy. We just ignore the heresy, appeal to the fathers, but we never leave the church.
Well, were they supposed to leave the church when the church became Arian?
They didn't leave the church.
Yes, they did.
They were the church.
No, they had to leave those congregations. That's what Athanasius and all the others said they have to do. They have to separate from those congregations.
Oh,
You
separate from the congregations, yes, but they were the true people that were not Arian were the church. That there was still some person there that was in the true church.
So
And it was Athanasius.
you do believe, first of all, that the vast majority of the church can fall into apostasy with its leaders, and second
But
of
never
all,
all of it.
okay, that's fine. I'm not going to say you're wrong. Like you have to say all of it. We aren't out here saying all of it, all of it. None of us are having to say that. We're looking for it. If somebody can show us the church that agrees with the early church, then we'll join it. But just to confirm, then you do believe the majority of leaders are capable of falling away based on the precedent of the Arian crisis, and secondly, you do believe that we're required to separate from heretical congregations, and that we are still the church even if we're not under a bishop. Is that right?
I think God values heavily obedience to a bishop, and I think if someone was ignorant and they were following what their bishop and following their priest, even if their priest is leading them to heresy, I think God will have mercy on their ignorance. But I think it is a very pious thing to separate from someone who's practicing heresy.
And I hope God has mercy on those people too. But yes, if we know they're heretics, we have to leave them. And we'll pray.
Yes, but there are a lot of, I mean, not everyone is educated with the fathers. Not everyone has read them. There are a lot of ignorant people.
Sure, but that's more dangerous for them. And just because somebody doesn't know something doesn't mean they will for certain be exempt from any accountability. They may still end up being led into a very evil practice that results in them being condemned.
Yeah.
So read this by Vincent here. It's just these 3 paragraphs. They're really good. But he talks about how we should be going back to the original church. He says, moreover, in the Catholic Church itself, and by the way, you know who Vincent is. Like he's very
Yeah.
famous. Okay, just making sure. Like
Yes.
let me just show you this one clip if you're not aware. Like Josiah Trenham and others say
Yeah.
things like this. You are already aware.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, well then I won't even go over it. But he says, moreover, in the Catholic Church itself, all possible care must be taken, that we hold that faith which has been believed everywhere, always, by all. For that is truly and in the strictest sense Catholic, which, as the name itself and the reason of the thing declare, comprehends all universally. And he says, this rule we shall observe if we follow universality, antiquity, and the consensus. So he's saying you find it all over the world, it's from ancient times, and it's the vast majority, not just a minority. He says, but what if some novel sickness seeks to infect not merely an insignificant portion of the church, but the whole church? Then it will be his care, the Christian's care, to cleave to antiquity, which at this day cannot possibly be seduced by any fraud of novelty. So he says at his current day, it can't fall away. But then he says, but what if in antiquity itself there be found error on the part of 2 or 3 men, or at any rate of a city, or even of a province? Then it will be his care by all means to prefer the decrees, if such there be, so he's saying sometimes there aren't, of an ancient general council to the rashness and ignorance of a few. But what if some error should spring up in which no such decree is found to bear? Then, this is what we have to do right here, Luke, then he must collate and consult and interrogate the opinions of the ancients, of those, namely, who, though living in various times and places, yet continuing in communion and faith of the one Catholic Church, stand firm, acknowledged, and approved authorities, and whatsoever he shall ascertain to have been held, written, taught, not by 1 or 2 of these only, but by all, equally, with one consent, openly, frequently, persistently, that he must understand that he himself also is to believe without any doubt or hesitation. So he's
I
saying
see.
if there should be some new contagion that infects not merely an insignificant portion of the church, but the whole, he's saying you need to cleave to antiquity. Do you see this?
Yeah, I agree that. I agree with that. But also, I have another question. Do you believe there is a true church? Or do you think you're restoring the true church? How do you think you can be in the true church? Do you think it's intellectual? Like if you believe what the fathers believed, then you're in the church, or what?
Well, a person has to be baptized and they have to take the Eucharist, so all those things are part of the
And
church.
you think you can administer? Like, are you the one person in this church? How many people are in this church?
I'll tell
Like,
you
how
if
could
it,
you?
I obviously don't think I'm the only person. I mean, this is a server of over 100 people. But Luke, if I could prove to you that the church fathers say that it's not only a permission we're given, but a responsibility we have to take the Eucharist apart from any priests, if there are no priests available, then would you say that what we're doing is legitimate?
When there's no priest available, a layperson to administer the Eucharist.
Yes.
I've seen stuff like that. I wouldn't. I mean, but that's like a rare occasion. I mean, I guess I can see how you're doing it because that the church is an apostasy. So yeah, I mean, in that case scenario, but that would still mean that you're. I mean,
That we're
it's
what?
very that you're. I mean, that would assume that everything like you teach is correct and that you're the truth. I mean, that's a very broad claim to therefore administer the Eucharist.
Well, if we're wrong about something, we're open to correction, but we're open to correction from the early church. And we've figured out things that we were wrong about over the years. I've been reading the church fathers for about 10 years. I had to be corrected about things. I wasn't practicing a lot of things that I should have been
Wait, do
doing.
you believe like your church is? infallible, or you're just trying to cling to what the fathers are by whatever means that is, but you don't think that your church is fully correct.
Well, we do believe we're fully correct, but I'm just saying we're open
But
to
you
being
just said you
corrected.
were wrong.
No, I said years ago I was wrong, and I've been corrected about things.
Oh,
Yes,
corrected by the fathers.
absolutely. Yeah. I and my brothers, especially three other brothers that I have, one of whom has been with me for almost 10 years himself, when we read the church fathers, we hold each other accountable and we say, are we obeying this? Are we being consistent here? And if we see any inconsistency, then we call each other out and we make sure that we're all following it consistently.
And you're interpreting it through your own literary means, like your own comprehension of language.
Right, just like Vincent said we should right here.
Do you believe your interpretation of the fathers is infallible?
We believe it's correct. If it were
It's
infallible,
correct,
I could
but not
never make
infallible.
any
Yeah.
if it were infallible, I could never make any mistakes. But wait a second, Luke. Are you saying that we're not allowed to interpret it for ourselves? Is Vincent wrong here? He says the
No,
laity
I think
must
you can
collate.
interpret. I think you should interpret it, yeah, based off of the consensus of the other fathers, and also through obedience. I think obedience is a highly good virtue to have.
Yes, but is it our responsibility? Do you agree with Vincent that it is the laity's responsibility to go and collect and consult and interrogate the opinions of the ancients, and that he is to believe without any doubt or hesitation what he finds that they all agreed on?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm not that crazy then. We're not crazy to do this, are we, Luke? Because we would have to do this even if we didn't think the whole church was in apostasy, even if we didn't think the Catholics and Orthodox are in apostasy, wouldn't we still be required to do this right here in order to find out
Yeah.
whether the Catholics or Orthodox are true?
Yeah. Okay. I definitely have a lot more grace on you guys now. Okay. I mean, it does just seem like you're trying to cling to the fathers, and I respect that a lot. I think that's good. I still think what you guys like the kind of 100-person little church is very like what the heck to me, but uh, I give you grace, and I think I can commend that you are appealing to the fathers for your church, although I don't think you have a valid episcopacy correctly right now, and I
Well,
don't think the fathers talked about everything. I think they talked about the issues of their days. Like they didn't talk about um, what are some modern issues? Vaccines, you know? I'm personally against vaccines. I don't know your stance on them, but the fathers didn't talk about that. So how can then you would have to have a correct magisterium to have councils and to be able to call a council to deal with that issue.
but in order to know which of these magisteriums are the correct one, the true authority, we would have to first verify that their doctrines match the early churches, right? So you're getting a
Do
little
you
ahead
think
of
there
yourself.
is a true authority?
Well, hypothetically, of course, we're going to be open to it, but we would have to be convinced first. We're not going to assume that. The difference between us is that you're assuming there has to be an institution, whereas we would show you evidence that the early church said the institution will someday disappear. And
Wait, but your website has an icon. Are you against icons, or you're against
there's
praying in front of icons? Like,
there's nothing wrong with pictures, and it's not a picture of anybody in particular. It's just actually somebody is David. You're gonna have to mute yourself. I'll unmute you in just a second, David, or if you're able to. Thank you. There's nothing wrong with pictures. Idolatry is not just having a picture, it's what you do to the picture. Idolatry comes from idol latreia. It means idol worship, idol service.
yeah,
So we don't serve images. Do you know what the word latreia means? Do you know how to serve an idol, Luke?
probably to bow down to it.
There are two ways to do it. God says you shall neither, he says you shall not make an image, you shall neither proskuneo nor latreia. So you know what proskuneo means, right?
Or worship.
It means bow down, is where we get the word prostrate.
Yeah,
And then he says, you shall neither bow down, proskuneo, nor serve it, or latreia. Do you know how we would serve an image or just serve God like the Jews did in the Old Testament?
venerate it, uh, bow down to it.
Well, proskuneo means bow down, so he's not saying the same thing twice. It's two separate things. The word latreia means spiritual service. It just means things like offering sacrifices or burning incense. So God is
Yeah,
saying, you shall neither bow down to images nor offer sacrifices like incense. Those are the two things
yeah.
he forbids.
I agree.
Do you believe, Luke, that the church of, say, the first 400 years, do you believe they teach a doctrine that is the unanimous teaching that you are to bow down to holy images and burn incense to them?
No, nobody taught. Not even my church teaches that.
So
We teach that we are offering incense to God. We just do it in the presence of icons. I mean, in the Old Testament, I'm pretty sure it's Exodus, they bowed down and to the Ark of the Covenant, and the guy touched it and he died, showing that there's a real presence of God in holy items. But it's never to the item ever. I mean, Saint John of Damascus said, "I do not worship matter, but I worship the Creator of matter, who became matter for my sake."
but then he goes on to say he will not cease to worship the matter. He does worship matter. He does say that we should worship matter. He says that the honor paid to the image passes to the archetype. So he says we do pay it to that image.
To the image, like
Yes.
as the image of. Wait, you're saying like Saint John of Damascus taught we do it to the image as in the physical item or to the person depicted?
He says that the honor paid to the image, talking about bowing to the image and burning incense to it. The honor paid
But
to the
I
image.
think I think that means the image as in the person depicted. The image of what is being depicted, not the image as in the physical item.
No, it definitely is the matter. He says, I will not cease from worshiping the matter through which my salvation has been effected. He says, yeah, I do worship matter. He believes matter is deified, remember? So they definitely are bowing down to the image. That's why they call them holy images. They don't just call it holy Jesus, who I'm spiritually imagining in my mind, but they say the image itself is holy, and we're bowing to that holy divine icon, right? And then they call themselves
Yeah,
iconoduals, right? It is dulia toward the icon.
I don't think so.
You don't think it is?
Well, worship. I mean, venerate can also be translated as worship. I don't know. I'd have to do more research on that.
Well, you
Um,
will, yes, you will. They've confused you with these
yeah,
words. They use venerate and worship and all these things very loosely, but that's confusing. We should just stick with the Greek words. Because if somebody says worship, I have no idea which Greek word they're referring to here, but I can tell you which ones I'm referring to. I can tell you the ones in the Bible. I can tell you the ones church fathers are using. They're using proskuneo and latreia. That would be
yeah.
bowing and doing spiritual services, such as burning incense or sacrifices. And I can tell you dulia. Do you know what dulia means?
Uh, worship.
Well, I
Oh,
mean,
no, no. Dulia is veneration. Sorry.
dulia does not mean veneration. That is a lie that they've tricked people with. Even I thought that for a long time when I would talk to them, and then I just looked it up in the Greek. This is the word dulia in the Bible. Like they'll say it's a respectful greeting or something. This is dulia. So, iconodulia. Moses said to the people, remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of dulia. For with a strong hand the Lord brought you forth. So he's saying out of the hand of, or out of the house of slavery. In Leviticus it says, if your brother has grown poor among you and sells himself to you, you shall not make him serve as a doulos, as a slave. And Paul says, you doulos, be obedient to those who are your masters according to the flesh, with fear and trembling. And in Romans he says, you did not receive the spirit of dulia again to fear, but you received the spirit of adoption. So this is slavery. It's just the Greek word slavery.
Do you speak Greek?
I know the definition of the word dulia.
But like in Greek, they have a single word means has vast definitions.
Dulia has one definition, and they've changed it. They want it to be about some kind of respectful greeting. It just means slavery. That's the definition of it. If you're an iconodule, you're an icon slave. That's the definition of it. Do you have a problem with that?
So I'm doing research on it. Hold on.
Go ahead. But hypothetically speaking,
Yeah.
Luke, would you see
Okay. Yeah.
this
No, I see. Dulia means servitude, homage, or reverent service.
right? Do you know that in the Greek, like you know how today if you say oh, that person is a slave in the Bible. People are like, no, don't say slave, servant. But you know, in the Bible, there's no difference between the two. A slave is a servant; they're the
Yeah.
same thing. It's just
Yeah.
us
I mean,
being
yeah.
touchy about that word slave, but it is the same thing. So if you have no problem with being a servant, and you know that the Israelites were not just servants, they were slaves, we're talking about slavery here, then
Yeah.
you do not have a problem with being called an image slave. Is that right?
As in the person depicted, never to the matter, yes.
You are enslaved to the person?
In Greek is poetic. It uses poetic imagery. I don't take everything like literally. I mean, I think calling me a slave to say my patron Saint Ignatius, like to a certain degree, it could be poetically correct, but I wouldn't take that in a literal sense. Yeah,
So is that a
I
doctrine of
don't
the
think
church that you're servants of the saints?
servants of the saints.
Right. Isn't that what you said?
It really depends on how you're wording it. I mean, like in a hmm,
And I don't want to be too hard on you, Luke. I want you to meditate on it and see, because some of this
yeah,
probably
no,
sounds really strange to you. You've never heard this before, that they call themselves icon slaves, iconodulia. And with Mary, they say hyperdulia, hyper slavery to
yeah.
Mary. And they have lied to people and said that adulia means reverence or something, or veneration, which is such
Yeah.
an ambiguous
Well,
word.
well, slavery and reverent, like I would again, like I think there's a lot of things that are allegorical, that are literal, and I think like slave, like yes, I could say I am a slave to Saint Ignatius of Antioch,
Are you a
but
slave to
it
icons,
doesn't
though?
mean icon and the person being depicted. There's a different, there's a distinction there.
Well, why is it icon slave? Why do they just call themselves that?
Why do they not call themselves icon slaves?
No, why do they call themselves? They call themselves icona duels.
Slaves, yeah, but I've never seen them say that they're worshiping the literal piece of wood. It's always the person depicted.
Well, of course, it's the image itself. Otherwise, they wouldn't say the image is holy and that you commit a great sin if you break the image. So there is reverence being paid to the
No,
image.
yes, there's reverence and there's holiness of matter because Christ sanctified matter through his incarnation.
Right. So you
But
you do believe it is
hold on.
iconodulia, not just dulia to the person depicted. You believe the icon itself is a means by which you venerate the person inside of it, right?
The icon, I mean, we call them windows to heaven. The icon has real stuff, but it's not, the icon is not where it is being directed, although it is holy in the sense that it is the means in which that direction is possible.
So you're not an iconodual. Are you uncomfortable with saying that you are an actual slave to the icon itself?
What that means. I mean, I think the reason why I wouldn't use that to say, for example, talking to a Protestant about Orthodoxy is to find that like a lot. I might use different terminology for that, but to a fellow Orthodox who understands what that means, then yes,
I see.
because that's correct.
So you said you
Yeah.
know that for the first 400 years, this doctrine is non existent, and that is a problem in itself. But are you aware that it's
Do
universally
you
condemned?
only do
By
you only appeal to the Ante-Nicene fathers?
I'll explain our philosophy. What we do is we see what was taught from the very beginning, and we see that many things were taught even long after the Council of Nicaea for many centuries. For instance, the church never changed its view of baptismal regeneration or the real presence or the Trinity. I mean, the church has always had a unanimous agreement, except for the Arian crisis. That's a pretty big mark on it. But generally, it has the same view. It always believes in free will and in the sanctity of marriage. So what we would say is if we see something continually being taught without any interference, any break, then we will not just quote people in the first 300 years, but we'll say, look, this belief continued for a long time for added evidence. But we do know that the church started to actually have serious problems after Council of Nicaea because of the emperors getting involved in ordinations and depositions. But when we say first 400 years, we're just saying that's a doctrine that they didn't have any variation on for 400 years, solid on image veneration, and they
Wait,
were
so if there was variation in 400 AD, then would you change to that?
well. If people
Like,
started, if the church fathers started to say something different, we would always defer to what was taught from the beginning. But I'm only flexing 400 years just because there is no variation even in the 400s. There's
you
not.
don't have like a current date on when they fell into apostasy.
Why don't we just focus on one topic at a time? Because we don't think the whole church
Well,
was.
are you still developing this paradigm?
No, no. It's just you're jumping on too many
So do you think you
subjects
have
at
the
once.
fullness of everything right now?
Yeah, I think we have a pretty good understanding of it.
But are you baptized?
Yes.
By who?
Well, doesn't the Orthodox Church think a baptism is valid if it's done in the proper form?
In extreme circumstances, and that's something called out of pastoral mercy or economia, not out of like a core or not latri economia. I forgot the
Isn't that like
word,
the
but
Augustinian view, like matter, form, or intention? Like even an atheist could perform the sacrament of baptism. That's like Catholic though. That's like the Catholicism of baptism.
Well, the
Where like you don't need to have somebody with the actual grace to baptize. At least this is just like my opinion, like on the topic. That's like Roman Catholic matter, form, and intention. But
Luke,
like
we
an
can.
atheist can baptize you if he just has the intention to baptize. But like I think in the Orthodox, somebody with the grace to actually like there has to be a grace, somebody like a mediator, and that's the bishop has the grace to be able to do the baptism. He's been ordained to do that.
No, the church has considered baptisms by the laity to be valid from the very beginning.
From the
baptisms by
the
what?
lady.
Yes, from the laity. We have a huge list of quotes.
Oh, lady. Uh, I I think that's out of extreme circumstances because you also have to take into consideration before Constantine, the church was under extreme persecution. So these persecutory examples are what predominant. And I've also mentioned that it's inconsistent to that because you don't have an answer to any actual modern questions. That fathers did not talk about vaccines and they
Too
didn't
too
talk
many
about
topics. Too many topics, Luke. But you do know about the Donatists, right?
yeah.
They said that all the sacraments had failed because there were certain bishops administering them who were very slack about certain doctrines, and the church, the Donatists, considered them to be heretics, and they said therefore all their sacraments, including baptism, are invalid. And the church responded and said, no, all the sacraments are valid no matter who administers them. And Augustine was the leader in it. He wrote a book on baptism specifically, and he said the sacraments are everywhere valid, even among unbaptized heretics. But he said they don't actually benefit the people doing them because what is the use of being baptized if you're currently practicing sin or you're in heresy? So you don't have to repeat the act of baptism, but you're still not actually cleansed of your sin if you're actively practicing it and you haven't repented of it. So they did
Do
consider
you
the
think
sacraments.
my baptism is valid?
Too many subjects, Luke. Let's just focus. I'm already working on so many different subjects. You see how I have to juggle so many things, and I understand why you have a lot of questions. But just real quick on the icons, since we were talking about that a while ago, and I don't want us to just leave that. You said you know that the church did not teach icon veneration for 400 years. Is that
No,
right?
they did. I take the scholarship done on Dionysius the Areopagite is valid, and when he says on divine names, he specifically talks about iconography.
He talks about bowing down to images.
Let me get it. I'll try to find the exact quote.
Please do. So you're saying you do think that the church unanimously taught this doctrine, or are you just saying a few people taught it?
Unan. I mean, I think anything. I think the councils are what. I don't think the church fathers were infallible. By the way, I
Do you
think the
think their
councils
unanimous
were infallible.
consensus is infallible?
Yes,
Okay.
but I also think that a council is what determines a unanimous consensus because the council is the collection of all the fathers
But
making a
but
decision.
according to the church, if you can quote 10 or more church fathers on one subject and they're all in unanimous agreement, they say that forms as it were a consentient council of doctors. So you don't need a formal council. Just having all the church fathers saying the same thing is a council. This is Vincent of
Oh,
Lerins.
okay. Yeah, but what if it contradicts a council that was placed?
If it's a
A
council that comes
council that
later, then the later council has to be wrong.
because who said that earlier is better?
Oh my goodness, Luke. You've got to be kidding me. You think that the
I mean,
church
like
Do you think the church can be
to
wrong for
certain degrees.
centuries, for like many centuries, and then the church later on can contradict it? Do you know what that word
No,
is you're
no, no, no.
describing? That's heresy.
I think no. I think early on is probably more reliable, but I also think that like the assumption that no correct theology can come on later.
Well, Luke, you're not just talking about no correct theology. You're talking about the church unanimously teaches something for centuries. and then people later on contradict it. That's what the Arians did, isn't it? Do they have the authority to contradict what was unanimously taught for the first centuries of the church history? We're not just talking about
Sorry.
we're not just talking about clarifying something. We're talking about completely contradicting and reversing a doctrine that the church held for centuries unanimously.
Okay. Wait. Do you Yeah. Okay. I gotta go. But this is interesting. I also have one final question.
Yes.
Do you think you should practice everything that the church fathers practice?
Absolutely, we should. Whether
Okay.
we have to do it to be saved is a separate question. But of course, we should obey everything the church unanimously taught.
Yeah. Okay. Do you walk around barefoot?
That's not something the church unanimously taught.
I mean, Clement of Alexandria taught that men should walk around barefoot.
Yes, and it is a good teaching. It's good for us to be manly. I
Yeah.
do go around barefoot most of the time, but it is not a unanimous teaching of the church. You know
Okay.
what is a
Luke, I
unanimous
have a
teaching?
question.
What is a unanimous
I have
teaching
a
is veiling of
question.
women. But you can go. We can talk again, Luke. Thank you for calling. I'll
All right.
talk to
Yeah.
you later.
Definitely. No problem. And I definitely am
Luke,
more
I
interested
have a
in what you
question.
are going on.
From what I see, something just happened to the church. Like I see too much sects. Like too much about something that entered to TikTok much like a propaganda
Yes, I agree.
that try to distortion of the truth.
We've seen the same
My
thing.
question, from what I remember, sometimes I say the Ante-Nicene of the two Christians. Somehow I have a feeling something that I don't understand. What just happened?
You mean in my conversation with Luke?
No, 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 no. It's about the Christianity that I remember.
Ah, I see. You're saying what happened to it.
Yeah,
Well, Jesus said that when he comes back to earth, he will not find the faith. And he said that when he returns, it will be like the days of Noah.
no, yeah,
And the days of Noah were
through this.
pretty bad.
Yeah, we are. But I try to search. Sometimes I'm very scary if something like some Gnostic people say about Judah, about if you fast, if you make something like this, if you come back, you are dead somehow. But I don't know. I'm scared sometimes.
Well,
Not me.
if you can read the church fathers in your own language, they'll tell you what the
Yeah,
original faith was.
Wait, Luke, can I ask what you believe on this topic? On Because somebody told me that you do believe in the saints being in heaven, or you agree with that, right?
No, the saints are not in heaven. They are in paradise, in the center of the earth. That's the unanimous teaching of the church for 300 years.
So they're not um, in the
my
heaven that
question is,
Revelation depicts.
look, I have a question. Uh, uh,
Well,
is this a
Dubas,
galaxy? I
it,
have just a question. Is this a galaxy or
is it a what?
idea of NASA? Blah 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 galaxy.
I'm sorry, Dubas. I don't think your English is good enough, but it can.
Yes,
I'm
I
sorry.
try to. I have dyslexia. That's why I speaking like this.
Well, I'm sorry. I wish I could talk to you, but I don't think I can. It's just English is
Very
not
hard
good enough. But God be with you.
because my dyslexia.
I
I know.
Yes, David, you were
Well, if we can
asking me.
continue the question that I Yeah. Then what is it that you think? Like, where's the place that they are? Like, is it kind of the place in Revelation, or where did where did Jesus take the captives from the heralding of Hades? Where are they?
Oh, I
Well,
remember this.
well, it says that he did lead captive a host of captives. But the question
Yeah.
is, were those captives the Christian? Were those believers or were those his enemies? And it's very possible when it says he led captive a host of captives, it's actually talking about the angels that he went and subdued. It says that he brought all the principalities and all the angels, the apostate angels, under subjection and had a kind of victory parade of them. So it's not necessarily talking about Christians or believers who he was leading. They were
It's
still
talking
in
about.
paradise.
It's because I was reading Matthew 27:52, and I bit because like it was like some random YouTube guy, and he tried to like make a point, and I was just like, let me read the church fathers. So I went through like probably like 20, 25 different church fathers commentary on it. So I read like majority of
Mhm.
the text that was connected to that, and
Mhm.
I have them in a doc if you'd like for me if you want to, and most of the church fathers when talking about who these people were, say like the and all that, say like these were like the people test.
Well, in any case, even if I did
Actually, so
not,
you could like, so I can actually be like, oh
you can
yeah,
send me that
continue.
document if you want, David. But the church's unanimous teaching is still
Sure,
the same, whether I have an
sure.
answer to the captives being led captive or not. Whether I have an answer or not, the church still teaches the same thing. And I have heard an explanation that I think makes sense, which is that it is actually talking about the apostate angels who Jesus led captive, who had once had.
Oh,
It was cutting out for a second, but those angels had once been in charge of all the souls in Hades, but Jesus went and took away the power from them, and he became the jail warden over all of those souls in Hades.
You- Look, this
I
I
mean,
remember. This
because
existed
when I was
in
reading,
Orthodoxy because this teaching, I don't know if it existed.
I muted him. Like I don't have a problem. It's just like his voice is a bit weird. Like it just makes my head hurt a little.
I'm afraid, Dubas, I'm afraid it just is not going to work. You can listen, but I don't think your English is good enough to participate, but I wish it was.
My head hurts. Yeah. Yeah. When I'm not driving, I'll go on my doc and I'll send you some of the church father writings and yeah, because it was talking about how they talk about Christ came and he led some people captive, and it talks about how he brought him out and took him to the like they were talking about like a place of glory. Like Origin talks about how it wasn't the it was like the heavenly Jerusalem. It wasn't the one that he wept on or he wept over. And he's talking about Galatian where he wept over the city of Jerusalem, like the actual like physical city on earth. But obviously Origin's saying he didn't take them to that Jerusalem, which a lot of people interpret, but he actually took them to the heavenly Jerusalem. That's just one where I was just like, well, if he's obviously taking them to like a different place outside of Hades, then that would imply that he's actually like leading people outside of Hades.
If Origen says that, he's talking about at a future time. It is not at the time. All the church fathers say that it is not until the resurrection that people get to ascend to heaven.
But he's commenting on Matthew 25, and Matthew 25 did happen. I'm gonna
Did,
check in it and yeah, continue.
no. I can tell you with all certainty, David, the church fathers are completely unanimous that absolutely none of the saints are in heaven. They are all waiting in paradise right now, waiting for their resurrection, and that
All the church fathers till what time? Like, do you have like a specific time?
until around the 300s or around the time when Christianity was made legalized. And during that time, the church began to venerate the past church fathers, the past martyrs and saints, more than they ever had, because they looked on that previous time period as this great epic time period, a period that was superior to them in faithfulness and devotion to
Yeah.
God. So the veneration really amped up in the 300s, and there was some misunderstanding about where souls go. They were
Sure.
and
Okay.
praying to saints also picked up a lot during that time.
Yeah, that was what I was gonna say. Like in the fourth century, third century, and I have them. I know church fathers that talk on the third century. That's why I wanted to know what's your like kind of like your standard. Like where do you say nah? Like that's a little bit. It's a little too far from my standard. But that's fine.
Yes, by the way, I have Irenaeus in chapter 83 of Demonstration of the Apostolic Preaching talking about what I was saying. So I'll post it here. This is Irenaeus, Demonstration of the Apostolic Preaching. You were asking what it meant that he led captive a host of captives. Irenaeus says, and that being raised from the dead, he was to ascend into heaven. David says thus, the chariot of God is 10,000-fold, thousands are the drivers. The Lord is among them in Sinai in his sanctuary. He ascended up on high. He led captivity captive. He received, he gave gifts to men. And Irenaeus says this, he says, and by captivity, he means the destruction of the rule of the apostate angels. So it's not talking about the Christians themselves going up to, or going anywhere. It just says that Jesus led them out. He led he led captivity itself captive. In other words, he's talking about the angels who were once in charge over the souls.
Okay, sure. Just send me that one, and when I have free time when I'm not driving, I'll look at the document that I got, and then I'll look into it and see like whether or not like if I double check. Um, for me,
Well,
in my reading, it doesn't say that, and then I'll send it to you, and then I'll get your opinion on it.
it's something that we've had a call on before where we read all the church fathers that we had on that subject. But you know that paradise and heaven are two separate locations, right?
Paradise and heaven. Like which one are you? Yeah, it depends which one you're referring to. Yeah.
Well, Jesus says, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." Do you think that's talking about heaven?
Mm, no, I think that's what does he say? I think it's like the bosom of the Lord. It's like calling
Abraham's
you to
bosom.
actual.
Abraham's bosom.
No, I think I read a church father depicted as the bosom of the Lord, basically the dwelling place of the righteous, awaiting kind of. Saint Ambrose of Milan talks about like they're participating in like kind of like a type, not a type, kind of like a foretaste of the reality to come in the second resurrection, which
You're
makes
thinking of
sense why
Abraham's bosom.
like yeah, maybe that's like a synonym the church fathers use. I'm not familiar, but
Hmm.
the word that I read was the Lord's bosom. It might be the same, it might be a synonym. I'm not familiar, but that's what I understand because that's the only way it makes sense when I read like the third, fourth century church fathers when they talk about like the intercession of saints. So
Yeah, we can see that it definitely evolved in the 300s and 400s. We can see why it evolved, just because they were looking back on the previous period, and they were trying to show their respect to those saints who had endured 300 years of persecution. And it's no surprise that they would view that the first 3 centuries as a separate era. We're not weird to do that. That's why even when people are talking about the church fathers, they always separate them between pre-Nicene and post-Nicene because they recognize there was a big change in the church at that time with the emperors getting involved.
definitely, yeah. I don't know. It just for me personally, it's just like the random like kind of distinction that you kind of posit. It's hard for me to just kind of like go with it. Like I don't see that. I don't see like kind of like a distinct like a separation.
Well, if you
Like I
read,
don't say well the third century, yeah, but then like randomly like 350, I'm gonna just not take them serious.
well, that's not
Or
what we
like you
do,
won't even
David.
say not take them serious, yeah, yeah. But
Let me explain the
like they have
philosophy,
less.
David. David, here's the
Yeah, sure.
philosophy. The church consistently taught some things, even well beyond the 300s and 400s and 500s. There are some things it never stopped teaching consistently, like baptismal regeneration or the Eucharist. But there are some things it did stop teaching consistently, Like, we will always quote the church fathers, even in the 300s and 400s and 500s, on a subject
Yep.
like veiling or Mary's sins, because they all talk about Mary's sins and they talk about veiling the face throughout those centuries. But
Yeah.
when it comes to something like war, we will stop quoting them up until about the 300s, because that's when they started to allow war. So some things continued, and we want to show that those doctrines were consistent for a long time in order to refute the Catholics. But other times we will stop at a certain point because that's when they changed the doctrine. We're not the ones being weird. It's the church that changed the doctrine, so we're not going to quote them anymore after a certain point.
Yeah, I understand like why you believe that. Like your paradigm. Yeah, I understand.
Well, very good. I guess Luke is done talking to this Luke, so I will move on. We had a good conversation. It started with great confidence and ended with none at all.
So where can I add? Like, where do you think the saints are right now? Do you think they're waiting paradise?
They are all in
Well,
paradise.
oh, yeah. Or and what is paradise? That's so they're not in Hades right now, right?
No, it is in Hades. Hades is divided between two
Okay.
compartments. One part is called Gehenna,
Okay.
the other part is called paradise.
Okay.
And I can send you a link if you'd like to read what the church fathers say about that.
Sure. Because I was reading Polycarp. I finished the totality of Polycarp like a couple of days ago.
That's
And
very good. Keep up the
I
reading.
have it in a. What happened?
Yeah, that's very good. Keep up the reading. It's good to start from the beginning and move through them all.
Yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. Like I'm just reading all the church fathers in their totality, from the beginning to the end. I don't want to like skip to like the fourth, fifth century. Yeah. But yeah, like I read in a part of Polycarp. I don't know what I think it's the martyrdom of Polycarp because that's when like they actually like there's like kind of like more eschatological talk because it's his death, and so like they talk about the afterlife a little bit more. And one of the writings is that they talk about how I don't want to paraphrase it because I can't really. It's talking about something that it emphasizes how now he is with the Lord and
Yes,
the apostles.
we believe that. We believe that they are with the apostles. We do believe that they're with the Lord. That's what Paul says too. He says, but to be absent from the body but present with the Lord is preferable. So we do believe that we are present with Christ in spirit, but not physically. We're not going to be
Physically,
physically with him.
no. Physically, no. Obviously, because the general resurrection hasn't come. We haven't taken up our glorified bodies yet. Yeah.
Yes. Do you remember when Paul says in 1 Corinthians, when he's talking about that man who has taken his father's wife and he pronounces judgment, he says, though I'm not present in body, I am present in spirit. So
Yeah.
to be, you can be present in spirit, and it's even possible that the spirits of the saints are present, although their souls, the actual conscious part of them, is not present with us. They're all in paradise. But the whole church is present in spirit, for instance, when we take the Eucharist, because we're all joined together in the Eucharist. But there is a difference between a spirit being present, or you being present in spirit, and being present in your soul or in your body. The church has always taught the distinction between body, soul, and spirit. Your soul is your actual conscious part of you.
The subconscious, yeah.
No, the conscious, not the subconscious.
Like self, yeah. You wouldn't say self-subsistence, right?
I have no idea what that means.
Never mind.
I'll talk to you guys later. I have to put my babies to bed, but they are not used to debating people who actually are knowledgeable and submissive to the church.
Look,
Yes.
I have a question. What just happened to the true church? It's like something is fishing.
Something is fishy.
Yeah, like Eastern Orthodox fishing.
Well,
I don't know.
they're disobeying the church's teachings. And Jesus said that this would happen, that the church would fall away. And so now,
That's why I say about the proto-Orthodoxy something. I read something. But warning us about this is going to happen.
I'm afraid it's too painful. We're gonna have to end the call
Something,
here.
I don't know.